My name is Meredith, and I need to tell you about the worst day of my life, the day I got married. 200 guests watched my mother walk up to me in my wedding dress and slap me across the face, hard enough that my ear rang for an hour. No warning, no explanation, just silence, then a slap, then chaos. Everyone thought she'd lost her mind. I thought so too for a while. But the reason behind that slap was buried so deep, so carefully hidden, that when I finally uncovered it, it changed everything I thought I knew about my family. We were 3 lines into my vows. I was looking at Daniel, my voice shaking with happiness, when I heard footsteps behind me, fast, uneven, wrong. Before I could turn fully, my mother's hand connected with my cheek so hard, I stumbled into the altar rail. The room gasped as one. Somebody's chair scraped back. Daniel just stood there, frozen, his mouth open around a word he never got to say. "You have no right to wear that dress!" my mother screamed, her voice cracking into something I'd never heard from her. Not anger, but terror. Before anyone could ask what she meant, my uncle and aunt grabbed her arms and pulled her down the aisle, her heels dragging against the marble floor. The officiant didn't know what to do. Neither did I. My wedding ended in silence, 200 guests staring at me, and no one, not one person, offering an explanation. To understand why that slap didn't fully surprise me, not deep down, I have to take you back to my childhood, to a house where warmth seemed to skip over me entirely. My mother was never cruel in ways anyone could point to. She just wasn't warm. My brother Ethan got bedtime stories and forehead kisses. My sister Priya got praised for every report card, every recital. I got fed, clothed, and kept at arm's length like she was raising a house guest instead of a daughter. There was an aunt, too, Aunt Rosalind, my mother's younger sister. She died before I turned 5, or so I was told. But growing up, her name landed in our house like a dropped plate. Nobody discussed her. The few times I asked, my mother's jaw would tighten, and she'd change the subject so fast it left whiplash. I noticed things, even as a kid. Our family photo albums had gaps, pages where corners suggested a photo once sat, now missing. Once, digging through old paperwork for a school project, I found my birth certificate and noticed the date of my parents' marriage didn't line up the way I expected with my own birth date. Just months, not years. And there was Marion, my mother's oldest friend, who always went quiet. Actually quiet, mid-sentence, whenever Aunt Rosalind's name came up, like she'd swallowed something bitter. I didn't know then that all these small cracks led somewhere. I just knew something didn't fit. 3 days after my wedding, I sat across from my mother at her kitchen table, still waiting for an apology, or at least an explanation. Instead, she stared at her coffee cup and said, "Some things don't need to be discussed, Meredith." That was it. That was all I got. When I pushed, the rest of the family closed ranks like I was the one who'd done something wrong. Ethan told me to let it go for once. Priya accused me of being ungrateful, of turning my special day into a spectacle by making a scene out of Mom's business. Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody asked why a grown woman had struck her daughter at the altar. I was the problem for wanting to know why. It was my grandmother, in a rare, unguarded moment, who let something slip. The dress, the one I'd worn, the one my mother had insisted I wear, calling it a family tradition, had belonged to Aunt Rosalind. It was never meant to be worn again. My grandmother's hands trembled as she said it, like she'd broken a rule just by speaking. Then, a week later, an envelope arrived at my apartment. Official letterhead, a law firm I didn't recognize. I was being summoned to court over a contested inheritance, one involving a trust I never knew existed, and a name listed as co-claimant that made my stomach drop: Rosalind Whitfield. My dead aunt was named in a legal document, present tense, as if she were still alive. I couldn't sit with that name, Rosalind Whitfield, listed present tense on a legal document, without unraveling, so I started digging. quietly, in the gaps between my job and my unraveling marriage plans that had already been thrown into chaos. I went back to my grandmother first, this time without my mother in the room. I brought coffee, patience, and every ounce of gentleness I had. Slowly, she started talking. She told me Rosalind's funeral had happened fast. Too fast, she admitted, barely a week after the family was told she'd died in a car accident out of state. No wake, no open casket, just a private service and a headstone that appeared almost overnight, as if someone wanted the matter closed before anyone could ask questions. Then I found the insurance documents, tucked in a box of my late grandfather's old files. A substantial life insurance payout had gone to my mother, as Rosalind's listed beneficiary, dated less than a month after the supposed accident. The math didn't sit right, insurance companies didn't move that fast, not without a body, not without proper documentation. That's when the estate's lawyers, already investigating the trust for the case against me, brought in a private investigator. He called me directly, said he needed to ask about my aunt's death certificate. There were irregularities, he said carefully, no attending physician's signature in the right place, a filing date that didn't match the alleged accident date, and no accident report on file anywhere in the state listed. I remember sitting on my kitchen floor after that call, staring at the wall, one horrifying thought looping through my mind. What if my mother didn't bury a sister 30 years ago? What if she buried a lie? The morning of the court date, I sat outside the courthouse in my car for 10 extra minutes, just breathing, trying to steady my hands before I had to face my family as something closer to strangers. Inside, they were already seated together, my mother, Ethan, Priya, a tight little unit, shoulders almost touching, none of them looking my way. Not one glance. It was the kind of silence you could feel on your skin, deliberate and rehearsed, like they'd agreed on it beforehand. My lawyer met me in the hallway, folder tucked under her arm, expression careful. "This isn't a simple inheritance dispute," she warned me quietly. "There's a contested trust worth far more than anyone told you, and a claimant listed who the estate can't verify is deceased." She paused, choosing her next words like they might detonate. "You need to prepare yourself for anything today." I nodded, though I didn't feel prepared at all. I scanned the courtroom doors, the reporters idling near the entrance, my family's stone faces, and I realized I didn't know who in that room actually wanted the truth, and who had spent 30 years burying it. The bailiff called the case, and just as the judge settled into her chair, the courtroom doors opened at the back. Every head turned. I heard my own breath catch before my brain caught up with what I was seeing. A woman walked in, silver-streaked hair, sharp cheekbones, a face that could have been lifted straight out of the old photographs I'd found as a kid, the ones missing from our albums. She moved like someone who'd rehearsed walking into this exact room 1,000 times in her head. My mother made a sound beside me, something between a gasp and a sob, and went the color of paper. "My name is Rosalind Whitfield," the woman said to the judge, voice steady despite the murmurs rippling through the gallery. "I am not deceased. I have been alive this entire time." She explained it plainly without flourish, how 30 years ago she'd been trapped in a marriage her own family arranged, one that turned violent behind closed doors. Faking her death had been her only way out, and my mother, her sister, had helped orchestrate it and had known every year since that Rosalind was alive. "I came back," Rosalind said, looking briefly at me, "because I heard my sister sent her own daughter down the aisle in my wedding dress. I knew if that dress ever surfaced publicly, someone would eventually ask why it looked so untouched by time. And the truth would come out anyway." My mother's outburst at my wedding suddenly made horrifying sense. She hadn't been protecting tradition. She'd been trying to bury the one piece of evidence that could resurrect a sister she'd hidden for 30 years and unravel every lie she'd built since. The courtroom didn't stay quiet for long after that. The judge called for order twice, as reporters scribbled and the gallery buzzed with disbelief. My mother sat frozen, no longer the composed woman who'd spent decades deciding what the rest of us were allowed to know. The trust unraveled fast after Rosalind's testimony. The inheritance my mother had quietly controlled, the one she'd funneled toward Ethan and Priya over the years under vague explanations, was suddenly under scrutiny. Every distribution she'd made in Rosalind's absence now looked less like grief and more like theft. My siblings, who'd spent my whole life basking in preferential treatment, sat stunned as their lawyer whispered urgently, their inheritance shares suddenly anything but guaranteed. During a recess, Rosalind found me in the hallway and pulled me into a hug that felt unfairly, achingly familiar, like something my body remembered even if my mind didn't. "You were the only one in that family who never lied to me," she said quietly. "You didn't even know there was a lie to tell." My mother, meanwhile, sat alone on a bench outside the courtroom, no lawyer beside her, no children rushing to defend her. Just the silence she'd spent 30 years building, finally closing in around her. In the weeks that followed, Rosalind and I met for coffee more times than I could count, filling in 30 years of gaps neither of us knew we'd been missing. She told me about the life she'd rebuilt in hiding, and I told her about the childhood I'd spent feeling like an outsider in my own home. Somehow, in her, I found the warmth I'd spent years searching for in my mother. I took the dress out of storage one afternoon and finally understood every thread of it. Not a tradition, but a confession stitched in silk. I didn't burn it, and I didn't hide it either. I hung it where I could see it, a reminder of what silence costs a family. I stopped waiting for my mother's approval. I stopped shrinking myself to fit a love that was never coming. For the first time, family felt like something I got to choose. My mother spent my whole life protecting a secret instead of protecting me. 30 years of silence, all to shield a lie that was never mine to carry. But I don't regret how it unraveled. Not the slap, not the courtroom, not any of it, because it gave me back a piece of my family I never knew I'd lost. So I'll ask you the same question I keep asking myself. What would you have done if the person you thought was gone forever walked back into your life at the worst possible moment?